I am 100 years old, and if there is one truth I have earned the right to speak, it is this. Longevity is not a victory of the calendar. It is a victory of the spirit, the body, and the mind working in quiet agreement over many decades. Many people assume that reaching a great age is about surviving time, about simply outlasting illness, hardship, or fate. But I have come to understand that real longevity is something far more deliberate. It is about learning how to live in such a way that each year feels inhabited, fully used, deeply experienced, and consciously shaped. When I was a young man, I believed, as most do, that the goal was to accumulate years like coins in a jar. I thought that if I could just avoid major mistakes, maintain a modest level of health, and carry on steadily, old age would take care of itself. Yet what I witnessed around me told a different story. I saw men grow old long before their hair turned gray. I saw people in their 50s who moved as though their lives were already finished, and others in their 70s who still walked with curiosity in their eyes. That contrast stayed with me. It planted a quiet question in my heart. What truly adds life to a lifetime? Over the decades, I began to see that the difference was rarely luck alone. It was not simply genetics, nor was it a single miracle habit. It was the accumulation of small conscious choices, the way a person eats, moves, thinks, loves, forgives, and continues to find meaning even when circumstances grow heavy. Longevity, I discovered, is less about resisting age and more about cooperating with life. It is about maintaining the inner conditions that allow vitality to remain present even as the body naturally changes. Energy, clarity, independence, and joy. These are the true currencies of a long life. Without them, years can feel empty, like rooms without light. With them, even advanced age can feel surprisingly expansive. I learned that movement keeps not only the muscles alive, but also the will to engage with the world. I learned that curiosity keeps the mind flexible long after formal education ends. I learned that relationships, when tended with patience and sincerity, become anchors that steady the soul during life's inevitable storms. Most importantly, I came to understand that aging well is not an accident. It is an intentional craft. Just as a sculptor shapes stone over time, we shape our later years through the patterns we repeat every day. The food we choose, the thoughts we rehearse, the purpose we pursue, all of these quietly construct the architecture of our future selves. When you realize this, longevity stops being a distant hope and becomes a present responsibility. At 100, I do not feel that I have merely lived long. I feel that I have lived deeply. And the secret I wish to share is simple, though it took me a lifetime to fully grasp it. Adding life to your years begins long before those years arrive. It begins in the ordinary decisions you make today, in the way you choose to value your vitality, your peace of mind, and your sense of meaning. That is where the true journey of longevity truly starts. As I moved through my 40s and into my 50s, the first subtle negotiations with time began. They did not arrive as dramatic warnings or sudden crises. They appeared quietly, like soft knocks on a door you are not yet ready to open. I noticed that recovery from fatigue took a little longer. I noticed that the enthusiasm of youth, once effortless, now required intention. It was during these years that I began to understand a profound cause and effect law that governs longevity. What you repeatedly do becomes what you eventually are. I watched friends who treated their bodies as though they were temporary machines. They ignored sleep, lived on convenience rather than nourishment, and postponed joy in exchange for endless striving. For a while, they appeared strong. But strength without stewardship is like a fire without fuel, impressive for a moment, unsustainable in the long run. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, their vitality dimmed, not because they lacked intelligence or opportunity, but because they lacked awareness of the quiet mathematics of aging. Every habit is a deposit or a withdrawal from the account of your future health. This realization changed me. I did not become perfect overnight. I did not suddenly transform into a man of flawless discipline. Instead, I began to cultivate respect for the simple rituals that sustain life. I learned to eat in a way that nourished, rather than merely satisfied. Fresh foods, balanced portions, and mindful timing became my allies. It was not a rigid diet, but a respectful partnership with my own biology. I came to understand that the body is not an obstacle to be overcome. It is a lifelong companion that responds faithfully to the way it is treated. Movement, too, became a philosophy rather than a chore. In my youth, exercise was about competition and performance. In middle age, it became about preservation and renewal. I walked often, sometimes without destination, simply to feel the rhythm of breath and step aligning. I stretched not to impress anyone, but to remind my muscles that they were still needed. These small acts, repeated day after day, quietly built resilience. They allowed me to enter older age not as a stranger to my own body, but as a familiar caretaker of it. Yet physical habits alone do not create meaningful longevity. I discovered that the emotional landscape of a person's life can either accelerate decline or extend vitality. There were seasons when grief visited me, the loss of loved ones, the disappointment of unrealized dreams, the heavy realization that time does not return what it takes. During these moments, I saw clearly how bitterness could harden the spirit. I saw how resentment could become a slow poison, affecting sleep, appetite, and even the posture with which one faces the day. So I practiced forgiveness, not as a grand moral gesture, but as a practical survival skill. Letting go of old wounds freed an enormous amount of energy. It allowed me to move forward without carrying invisible weights. I learned that emotional flexibility is as essential as physical flexibility. When the heart remains open, the mind follows. And when both remain open, life continues to feel worth engaging with, even when circumstances are less than ideal. Purpose also revealed itself as a decisive factor in the quality of one's later years. I noticed that those who retired from responsibility often retired from enthusiasm as well. Without something meaningful to contribute, the days can begin to blur into one another. I chose a different path. Even after stepping away from formal work, I sought ways to remain useful. I mentored younger people, tended a modest garden, and volunteered where my experience could still serve. These actions were not about proving relevance. They were about maintaining connection. Purpose is a form of oxygen for the soul. Without it, the spirit suffocates long before the body fails. Another quiet truth I learned is that the mind requires continuous cultivation. Intellectual curiosity is not reserved for students. It is the inheritance of anyone willing to remain awake to the world. I read widely, listened attentively, and allowed myself to be surprised by new ideas even in advanced age. This openness prevented my thinking from becoming rigid. It kept conversation lively and relationships dynamic. A flexible mind adapts more easily to the inevitable changes of aging, while a closed mind experiences each change as a personal defeat. Relationships themselves became a central pillar of my longevity. Over time, I realized that independence does not mean isolation. Human beings are designed for connection. Shared laughter, honest dialogue, and mutual support form a network of strength that no individual can replicate alone. I invested in friendships that were sincere rather than convenient. I nurtured family bonds even when misunderstandings arose. The effort required patience, but the reward was profound. In moments of vulnerability, it is these relationships that provide both practical help and emotional warmth. Spiritual reflection, too, deepened my understanding of what it means to add life to one's years. I am not speaking only of formal religion, though for many it provides comfort and guidance. I am speaking of the broader sense that life has meaning beyond immediate gratification. Taking time for silence, contemplation, or prayer allowed me to step back from the noise of daily concerns. It reminded me that my existence was part of a larger tapestry. This perspective softened fear and cultivated gratitude. When gratitude becomes a daily habit, even ordinary experiences begin to feel enriched. I must also mention resilience, the capacity to adapt when plans collapse or health fluctuates. Longevity does not grant immunity from difficulty. I faced illnesses, financial uncertainty, and moments of deep doubt. But I gradually understood that resistance to reality only amplifies suffering. Acceptance, on the other hand, opens pathways to creative solutions. By focusing on what remained possible rather than what was lost, I preserved a sense of agency. This mindset protected me from the despair that can accelerate physical and mental decline. As the years accumulated, these intertwined habits formed a stable foundation. They did not eliminate aging, nor did they guarantee uninterrupted happiness. What they provided was continuity, a thread of vitality running through changing circumstances. By the time I reached my 70s and 80s, I realized that the seeds planted decades earlier were now bearing fruit. I could still walk without assistance, think with relative clarity, and greet each morning with a measure of anticipation. That, to me, was the real reward. Looking back, I see longevity not as a distant achievement, but as a lifelong dialogue between intention and consequence. Every thoughtful choice whispered encouragement to my future self. Every neglected habit quietly warned of potential decline. The balance of these influences shaped the texture of my later years, and so I share this with you. The quality of your old age is being negotiated right now in the seemingly ordinary decisions that fill your days. When I entered my 80s, a new dimension of aging revealed itself, not as a crisis, but as a quiet turning inward. By then, the external achievements that once defined my sense of identity had softened in importance. What remained was something more essential, the question of how to live meaningfully when the horizon of time becomes more visible. Many people fear this stage. They imagine it as a narrowing of possibilities. Yet I discovered that it can also be an expansion of awareness if one learns how to listen to life differently. Physical changes were undeniable. My steps became slower, my hearing less sharp, my endurance more selective. But instead of interpreting these changes as losses alone, I began to see them as invitations. They invited me to become more attentive, more deliberate, and more appreciative of simple experiences. A walk in the early morning, once a routine act, transformed into a moment of deep presence. The sound of wind moving through trees, the warmth of sunlight on aging skin, the steady rhythm of breath. These sensations carried a richness I had overlooked in busier decades. This shift in perception taught me an important principle about longevity. Vitality is not solely dependent on youthful strength. It is also sustained by the ability to derive meaning from subtle pleasures. When the pace of life slows, awareness has the opportunity to deepen. Those who resist this slowing often suffer unnecessarily, clinging to a version of themselves that no longer exists. But those who adapt discover a quieter form of fulfillment. They learn that joy can coexist with limitation, and that purpose can evolve rather than disappear. During these years, I became increasingly conscious of the stories we tell ourselves about aging. Society often portrays old age as a period of decline and irrelevance. These narratives can become self-fulfilling. If you believe that growing older means becoming invisible or burdensome, you may unconsciously withdraw from engagement. I chose instead to cultivate a narrative of continued participation. I reminded myself daily that my perspective, shaped by decades of experience, still held value. This belief motivated me to remain curious, to stay informed about the world, and to contribute where I could. Mental agility became one of my most treasured resources. I exercised it deliberately, much as I had once exercised my muscles. I learned new skills, however modest. I experimented with unfamiliar technologies, even when frustration accompanied the learning process. I held conversations with people far younger than myself, allowing their ideas to challenge and refresh my thinking. These interactions prevented the stagnation that so often accompanies advanced age. They reinforced the understanding that growth does not have an expiration date. Another profound realization emerged as I witnessed the gradual departure of contemporaries. Each loss reminded me that longevity carries both privilege and responsibility. To outlive many of one's peers is not only a testament to endurance, it is also an opportunity to become a living bridge between generations. I began sharing stories more intentionally, not to dwell in nostalgia, but to offer context. Young people listened with a mixture of curiosity and surprise, recognizing that the past they studied in books had once been someone's daily reality. In these exchanges, I felt a renewed sense of usefulness. I was no longer simply an individual aging. I was a custodian of memory. Emotional equilibrium also took on heightened importance. The accumulation of years can amplify both gratitude and regret. I encountered moments when unresolved choices resurfaced in my thoughts, asking for attention. Instead of suppressing these reflections, I allowed myself to process them with honesty. I acknowledged mistakes without surrendering to self-reproach. This internal reconciliation brought a sense of peace that no external achievement could replicate. It was as though I was gradually organizing the inner landscape of my life, preparing it for a gentle conclusion whenever that might arrive. Spiritual awareness deepened further during this stage. I felt less urgency to control outcomes and more willingness to trust the unfolding of events. This did not mean passivity. Rather, it signified a mature form of acceptance. I continued to care for my health, to maintain routines, and to pursue meaningful interactions. Yet I also recognized that uncertainty is an inherent aspect of existence. By making peace with this truth, I reduced the anxiety that often shadows old age. Serenity, I discovered, can be cultivated through a balance of effort and surrender. The environment I created around myself became another decisive factor in sustaining quality of life. I simplified my living space, removing unnecessary clutter, both physical and mental. A well-organized home supported safety and independence. Familiar objects, photographs, and books provided comfort and continuity. At the same time, I remained open to change, understanding that adaptability is essential for longevity. When assistance became necessary in certain tasks, I accepted it without interpreting it as a personal failure. True independence, I realized, includes the wisdom to recognize when collaboration enhances well-being. Nutrition and movement continued to play vital roles, though in modified forms. I paid closer attention to balance, hydration, and moderation. Gentle exercises, stretching, and daily walks preserved circulation and coordination. These practices were less about building strength and more about maintaining function. They allowed me to participate actively in life rather than observing it from a distance. Each small effort reinforced my sense of agency, reminding me that even in advanced age, choices still matter. Perhaps the most transformative lesson of my later years has been the cultivation of gratitude. Gratitude for the ordinary miracle of waking up each morning. Gratitude for the opportunity to witness the changing seasons, to hear laughter, to feel the reassuring presence of companionship. This mindset does not deny hardship, it contextualizes it. By focusing on what remains possible rather than what has been lost, I preserved a forward-looking orientation. Longevity, in this sense, became less about counting remaining years and more about enriching present moments. Approaching a century of life has taught me that aging is not a single uniform experience. It is a dynamic process shaped by perception, intention, and adaptability. The body inevitably changes, but the human capacity for meaning can continue to expand. Those who learn to align their habits, emotions, relationships, and beliefs with this reality often discover that old age, while challenging, can also be profoundly illuminating. It reveals what truly matters, stripping away superficial concerns and leaving behind the essence of one's character. Now, as I reflect on the path that has brought me here, I see a continuity of choices linking youth to advanced age. The seeds planted early, the resilience developed in midlife, and the awareness cultivated in later years have converged into a form of longevity that feels authentic rather than accidental. I have not merely survived the passage of time, I have participated in shaping how that passage has unfolded. And this, perhaps, is the deepest secret I can offer. The meaning of longevity is discovered not at the end of life, but throughout the journey of becoming fully alive. Now, as I stand at the threshold of a full century, I find myself less concerned with how many days remain and more attentive to how each day is lived. When people ask me what it feels like to reach 100 years, They often expect a dramatic revelation, a single defining secret that explains everything. But the truth is quieter and more profound. Longevity is not the result of one extraordinary decision. It is the natural outcome of thousands of ordinary ones, repeated with awareness, patience, and purpose. If I could speak to my younger self, I would not urge him to chase youth or to fear the passing of time. I would tell him to respect the invisible architecture of daily habits. I would remind him that the body remembers every kindness and every neglect. I would encourage him to cultivate relationships not as conveniences, but as sacred investments in emotional resilience. Most importantly, I would teach him that meaning is not something discovered by accident. It is something created, nurtured, and protected through the way we choose to live. Adding life to your years, I have learned, begins with the decision to remain engaged with existence. It means refusing to become indifferent to your own well-being. It means treating your mind as a garden that requires constant tending, your heart as a vessel that must remain open despite inevitable disappointments, and your body as a partner deserving of care rather than criticism. When these elements are aligned, aging transforms from a slow decline into a gradual deepening. The surface of life may grow quieter, but its inner richness becomes more apparent. There were times when I feared the future, times when illness, uncertainty, or loss cast long shadows across my path. Yet each challenge, when faced with courage and adaptability, strengthened my capacity to continue. I discovered that resilience is not the absence of vulnerability. It is the willingness to move forward while acknowledging it. This understanding freed me from the illusion that longevity requires perfection. Instead, it showed me that authenticity, the honest acceptance of one's limitations alongside one's strengths, is what allows vitality to endure. As I look back across the decades, the memories that shine most brightly are not those of grand achievements or material success. They are moments of connection, of learning, of quiet contentment. They are the mornings when I chose to walk instead of remain idle, the evenings when I listened instead of argued, the days when I dared to begin again after failure. These seemingly modest choices accumulated into a life that feels full rather than merely long. To you who are listening, perhaps still far from the age I have reached, I offer this final reflection. Do not wait for old age to consider the meaning of longevity. The process has already begun. Every thought you cultivate, every habit you reinforce, every relationship you honor is shaping the quality of your future years. Time will move forward regardless of your intentions. But the experience of that time, whether it is marked by vitality or regret, remains largely within your influence. At 100 years old, I do not claim to have mastered life. I remain a student of its unfolding mysteries. Yet I carry a deep sense of gratitude for the opportunity to witness so many seasons, to grow through both triumph and hardship, and to discover that true longevity is less about enduring existence and more about enriching it. If my journey offers any wisdom, let it be this. Cherish your vitality, protect your peace, and live with deliberate awareness. In doing so, you will not simply add years to your life, you will add life to your years.